Welcome to Part 5 of Chapter 11, The Functional Organization of Nervous Tissue. This presentation will cover excitatory and inhibitory postsynaptic potentials, spatial and temporal summation, and circuits. Let's begin by learning about excitatory and inhibitory postsynaptic potentials. As a reminder, chemical synapses function by a neurotransmitter diffusing across the synaptic cleft and attaching to a receptor on the postsynaptic neuron. This opens a ligand-gated ion channel. Depending on which ion the ligand-gated channel is for, the postsynaptic potential can be excitatory by causing a depolarization or inhibitory by causing a hyperpolarization. In excitatory postsynaptic potentials, or EPSPs, neurotransmitters open ligand-gated sodium channels in the postsynaptic cell. Sodium enters the cell, causing depolarization. Depolarization is stimulatory because it brings the membrane potential closer to threshold. EPSPs may cause depolarization that reaches threshold and produce an action potential, and therefore a subsequent cellular response will occur. In inhibitory postsynaptic potentials, or IPSPs, neurotransmitters open ligand-gated potassium or chloride channels in the postsynaptic cell. Potassium leaves the cell, or chloride enters the cell, both causing hyperpolarization. Hyperpolarization is an inhibitory response because it moves the membrane potential farther from threshold, making it more difficult for the cell to create an action potential. Let's now continue by learning about the speed of action potential conduction. A single postsynaptic potential may not be enough to reach threshold, but many postsynaptic potentials combine and summate in the trigger zone. If threshold is reached, an action potential is triggered. There are two types of summation to discuss. The first type of summation is spatial summation. In spatial summation, two different dendrites are stimulated, resulting in two graded potentials. Neither graded potential is large enough to reach threshold. When the graded potentials are summated at the trigger zone, their sum does reach threshold, resulting in the generation of an action potential along the axon. I think of spatial summation as adding together graded potentials from different spaces, like two dendrites. The second type of summation is temporal summation. In temporal summation, two action potentials arrive in close succession on the same dendrite. The first action potential produces a graded potential that doesn't reach the threshold. The second action potential produces a graded potential that summates with the first one, and the threshold is then reached. An action potential is then produced at the trigger zone. So with temporal summation, it is two graded potentials adding together in the same place, but at different times. So they're right next to each other, right after one another, but they're actually at slightly different times. Postsynaptic dendrites receive EPSPs and IPSPs, which produce graded potentials. All of the graded potentials, be them hyperpolarizing or depolarizing, are summated, both spatially and temporally. If the summation reaches threshold, an action potential is produced at the trigger zone. Let's now tackle our last topic of Chapter 11, circuits. Neural circuits are functional groups of neurons that process specific types of information. We will discuss 4 types of circuits: convergent, divergent, reverberating, and parallel after discharge. In convergent circuits, many inputs converge and synapse with a smaller number of neurons. An example is the brain taking several clues like temperature, being cold, no flowers are blooming, no leaves are on the trees, and holiday decorations are out, and then deciding that it is winter. A divergent circuit is when a small number of neurons synapse with a larger number of neurons. An example of this type of circuit is when important information is transmitted to many parts of the brain. Reverberating circuits are one where the outputs cause reciprocal activation, or, in other words, give feedback to the previous neurons. Reverberating circuits are found in rhythmic activities like breathing and walking. The last circuit is the parallel after discharge circuit. Here, neurons stimulate several neurons in parallel organization, which converge upon a common output. An example would be mathematical equations. So take the equation of 3 multiplied by 10. It can be done in different ways to get the same output. Like you can count by tens 3 times, like 10, 20, 30. Or you can count by threes 10 times, like 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 27, 30. So different ways of processing that information lead to the same answer. In this presentation, we learned about excitatory and inhibitory postsynaptic potentials, spatial and temporal summation, and circuits.